We'll go ahead and get started and let everyone catch up as they come aboard. Welcome. My name is Aaron Bennett. I'm a senior manager in tech alliances here at ServiceNow. It's my great pleasure to introduce Chris Coburn from Recorded Future. He's a senior architect and is going to talk about the ServiceNow integrations from Recorded Future today and how Recorded Future helps automate security workflows in ServiceNow, which is one of the it is one of the premier integrations provided by our partners for our security modules, and Recorded Future is one of our premier partners in security. So it's super great to have Chris here today. Chris, if you want to add anything or if you want to get started, thanks
No.
for presenting.
Yeah, thanks so much for the great introduction there, Aaron. Yeah, so same as we try to be a great partner for ServiceNow. ServiceNow has always been a great partner for Recorded Future, and really excited to show you kind of what Recorded Future is all about and talk a little bit about how our threat intelligence can help really improve your workflows across different security operations, and focused on the tooling that ServiceNow provides.
Yeah,
Um,
and
so.
I'll be
Oh,
watching the questions today. Sorry to interrupt. Be watching the
yeah.
questions today. So if there's anyone who wants a little clarification about what Recorded Future does, how everything works, or questions when we get to the integration demo, just raise hand, put it in the chat, and I will fold it into the presentation with Chris. Chris, sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got to pause me because I'll talk a mile a minute if you don't slow me down. So, this is the first slide that every security company in the world kind of puts out there, but it still needs to be said, and you guys are probably pretty aware of this as people that work in the security industry. But the landscape is changing, and it's changing how we have to look at cybersecurity from an enterprise perspective, right? Geopolitics are impacting our cyber world right now with the Russia-Ukraine crisis and cyber warfare. That's impacting how our enterprises can do business. We have evolving technology that, talking about AI and all of these things that we have to, kind of continue to invest in digital transformation. And we all know that digital transformation comes with its risks, especially in the cyber world, right? We've been hearing about the talent gap since I started in cyber, 10 or so years ago, and we are still going to continue hearing about the talent gap. No amount of us complaining about the talent gap has gotten enough kids in school to be cyber analysts. So we're going to continue to have it. So we need tools to help the people who are there, get their jobs done, right? We've got a lot of pressure. We've got regulatory pressure, right? The regulations and laws around cyber are not getting any easier. They're getting harder, right? And so, CEOs and CISOs, right, are not only concerned about, protecting themselves about a cyber attack, but they have to worry about the legality of all of that as well. And then the other piece of it, which we'll talk a little bit here, is the supply chain, right? Like, I can do everything in my power to protect my own company, but then I can get absolutely crushed because one of the products I use or one of the vendors that I use introduces a cyber risk to me that I have no control over, right? So what are we doing now, and why is it not perfect, right? Why are we not as safe as we possibly could be from a cyber perspective, right? We've got a narrow threat or risk. We prefer to talk about risk. We've got a narrow risk aperture, right? So we're focused on internal things. We're focused on the firewall. We're focused on the endpoint. We're focused on this, and this, rather than understanding the external view of adversaries and threats, right? We're very reactive, right? Someone installed a piece of Stealer malware on a laptop. I better go reformat that machine, instead of thinking like, well, how did that Stealer malware get into place? Like, don't just react to the things coming in. Try to be try to have an insightful look at what's going on in your environment. Limited automation, right? ServiceNow lives in this game. We don't have enough people. We need to automate, right? This cannot be a people process thing all the time. We need to help the people and help the process, right? Lack of actionability, right? Like this idea that like, hey, this is risky. Well, what does that mean, right? How do I handle this risk? Like, what do I do with this risk, right? And obviously lack of business alignment, right? Like in too many companies, the cyber team is just the people that say no to things and the people that get in the way of business. I've certainly felt that way about our cybersecurity team at Recorded Future, right? That's not the way we need to do business, right? We need to have the alignment between the IT teams, between the security teams, between the business teams, between the analyst teams, between the marketing teams, right? We need to get all of these goals aligned and this context of what's going on in the world aligned, so that we can be aligned and actually solve the problems and not just get in each other's way. Well, how does Recorded Future do that? So if you're unaware, Recorded Future is the largest commercially available source of threat intelligence in the world, of cyber threat intelligence in the world. And, I like to describe this of there's different kinds of threat intelligence. Everybody has sort of their preconceived notions of threat intelligence. There's sort of the endpoint driven threat intelligence that you see from some vendors where, that vendor may have billions of endpoints and they collect data across those endpoints and they provide that data to their customers or to people who buy their service. I mean, and that's an interesting, valuable source of information. There's obviously open source information, right? These are security researchers or research companies that are taking, the research they're doing and making it available open source, which is, valuable, but has its own little niche. There's sort of boutique intelligence, right? So I think there's some people that think about that as threat intelligence, right? Like you've got a team of very advanced analysts creating finished intelligence for specific subsets or sub use cases in the cyber world, right? Like they're focused on Russian cyber underground or whatever, and they create intelligence. And then there's the way we do it. And the way we do it is we try to collect as much of the internet as we possibly can. So it's about 1 million technical sources that we're collecting every second of every day. And when I say 1 million sources, this crosses open web, right? So we're collecting from security blogs and GitHub and social media and news sites and anything you can imagine on the open web. The deep web, right? Things that may be behind forum access or maybe special access or maybe lesser known areas of the internet. And then of course of the dark web, right? What's going on in the Tor infrastructure. So we try to get access and we maintain personas across the dark web so we can see what the threat actors and all of the people that converse on the dark web from a cyber perspective are talking about. We collect all of this across any language. We do full deep language learning across 14 languages. We apply entity relationship mapping and ontology analysis. And that's what creates this giant corpus of data. And for the data geeks here that may be listening, it's hard to describe how massive our data set is. To be honest, it's hard for us to even track. It's larger than the Google search index now. That's how big it is. And it's just massive amounts of data. And so what we do is we take this massive thing of data and we split it into use cases that our customers need, right? Whether that be, security operations use cases around indicators of compromise, whether that be third party and supply chain risk, customers looking to understand, are the vendors I'm working with risky? Vulnerability intelligence for vulnerability teams trying to understand what they're doing, geopolitical identity, we have tons and tons of brand intelligence, tons and tons of different ways to use this vast knowledge graph of data to help you with your cyber concerns and your cyber workflows. We also take that data and push it into integrations. And this is sort of our kind of main topic of conversation here. ServiceNow is a great example of a place where we can take our data and make the tools that you're already using better, right? Yes, we have a portal to access the data. I'm not even going to show you a screenshot of that today. But in my view, if you never go to our portal, but you get all of the value of our intelligence across the tools you use every day, that's more valuable to me than someone that just goes to the portal, right? We need to get you the intelligence that you need in the tools that you're using. And that's a big focus at Recorded Future. And you can see that by our vast library of integrations. So when I talk about these integrations, what am I talking about? Well, you can see there's a few ServiceNow ones here. So I'm talking SOAR tools, right? I'm talking SIMs. I'm talking vulnerability management platforms, identity and access tools, tips, EDRs, NDRs, XDRs, QDRs, whatever DR. I'm sure, RSA next week, I'm sure we'll see some new DRs. The idea is there are a lot of places for this intelligence to exist. So we built Recorded Future with integrations in mind. We have a robust set of APIs, and we really focus on building the best integrations we possibly can with the tools that your customers are using. As you can see, ServiceNow is very well represented here. They're a big focus partner of ours, and so anytime ServiceNow comes out with some new interesting thing that we can integrate with, we usually try to figure out how to get it in. So the three integrations I want to talk to you about today really are fit both within the security operations world of ServiceNow, but also the vendor risk management. Now, I think that's a super underutilized area of cyber, understanding your supply chain risk. And while, I don't think ServiceNow kind of considers this a security operations type of module, it can absolutely be impactful to your security operations. So here are the three integrations. So for ServiceNow, what SIR, or a security incident response, what are we doing? Well, first off, Recorded Future generates alerts, especially if you have one of our modules called Brand Intelligence, which focuses on things like credential leakage monitoring, brand mention on the dark web, typo squat domain detection, executive impersonation on social media, that types of thing. We generate alerts for all of those types of things. But again, our platform is not the greatest place to interact with alerts, right? You want to interact with those alerts in the place you want to interact with alerts, which is ServiceNow, right? And so we bring in those alerts with all of the context and all of the capabilities right into ServiceNow so that you can manage them as part of your overall, incident response lifecycle. The big, one of the most valuable things that we can provide in security incident response is indicator of compromise enrichment, right? So if you have an IP domain hash or URL, and I'm going to show you this, what is it? Is it risky? Why is it risky? If it is risky, what is it, what is it associated to? Like what MITRE ATT&CK T codes, threat actors, etc. And so the idea there is very much like giving the incident responder all of the information they could possibly need to make a decision as quickly as possible before they even open the incident, right? They don't even have to open the incident. It's already there, ready to go. They don't have to go search. They don't have to go Google. They don't have to go do anything. It's the data is there. They can make a decision. And then the last thing is we also bring in large lists of indicators into ServiceNow so that you can use those as part of workflows, right? So if you want to take those large lists of indicators and push it to another tool or maintain it in ServiceNow's kind of intelligence architecture, that is available too. So where it's not just about single indicators, we can do kind of larger lists of our known indicators as well. The other integration I'm going to talk about today is vulnerability response. So Recorded Future has a big focus on vulnerabilities. We're a very outside-in perspective of vulnerabilities. So everybody understands CVSS, so the what comes out of the NVD. CVSS score is very much like how bad is this vulnerability to this specific host. And that's extremely valuable, and we're not trying to take away from that. What our scoring is more about is like how likely is this host to be attacked? So, has it been exploited in the wild by active malware? Is there proof of concept code available on GitHub? Are they talking about it on the dark web? Those type of information so that you can implement our scoring plus CVSS scoring. In my opinion, the best way to do this is in ServiceNow with their risk calculators, right? You can now take Recorded Future and use that data as a data point to really make a decision on how you should prioritize vulnerabilities for patching. We'd all love to patch every possible vulnerability, but I mean, at the rate that our software developers in the world create vulnerabilities, I don't think it'll ever be possible, right? So if we can help, if we can help you prioritize and really make a good decision in terms of which vulnerabilities to patch, we think we can save you a tremendous amount of time and make you a more secure enterprise. And then the last one is vendor risk management. So I've talked about this, right? Like, you need to be aware of the cyber risk of your third parties, right? And so we track, because we're doing a lot of those use cases in brand in terms of typo squat domain detection and breach monitoring and brand mentioning on the dark web and credential leakage and all of those things, we can kind of track what's going on with vendors, right? So are you working with vendors that are introducing risk to your business, right? And so let's go into a little bit more detail at how this works. So for security incident response, the first thing that happens is like as an incident gets created, you all know that like indicators get pulled into that incident. So that incident might be coming from a SIM like QRadar or Splunk, might be coming in from an EDR tool like SentinelOne. And so once that alert or that incident is created and those indicators are parsed out, we immediately look up those indicators within Recorded Future and provide all of that information and that context right within ServiceNow. The other piece of it is it constantly re-looks up those indicators for a short period of time to make sure that, hey, like, the first time, that incident was created, maybe Recorded Future didn't quite know about it yet, but 10, 15 minutes or maybe an hour, maybe 5 hours later, Recorded Future had got some evidence to show that, hey, that hash is actually malicious, or hey, that IP address is part of some C2 infrastructure. right? And so we kind of maintain this like up-to-date level of, hey, this is what this indicator is all about, and here's what you need to do, right? And we push that right into the incident response ticket so that you can make a decision right away of what's going on. Once we've done that, we also push that data into the threat intelligence framework of ServiceNow so that you'll have it there in, if you know, the next time you see that indicator, you'll have that data and that information that from that previous incident. The next thing we have is our alerts, right? So we're bringing in the alerts into ServiceNow. So whether that be dark web threats or typo squat domains, I think I'm going to show you a typo squat domain detection, for example. But we're bringing in those alerts into security incident response. We're allowing you to kind of manage those alerts, close them, work on them, do whatever you need to do within ServiceNow. And all of that gets pushed back to recorded future as well. So you don't have a bunch of alerts just sitting there. And the last thing is, you know, we do load some of these large data sets into like defined feeds. And so those feeds are available to you in whatever workflow capacity you want to use them. So for, and this is just a little bit more talking about that. So for ServiceNow VR, same thing, right? You have a vulnerability. That vulnerability came from a scanning tool. It has a CVE. Recorded Future will look up that CVE and tell you what we know from the external context. That information gets pushed into the vulnerability itself so that you can read it and make a decision. But also, it's scoring the risk score, and I'll talk about the risk score a little bit. The risk score is added to risk calculator so that it helps prioritize the scoring, so that if you go into your ServiceNow vulnerability response and you sort by risk score, Recorded Future can impact that score, right? And so that way it helps you make sure that you are, you know, properly prioritizing those vulnerabilities for patching. And then obviously, you know, you can use the vulnerability response platform to either push an incident or an ITSM ticket to go get that thing patched. So that's the ServiceNow side of the world. And the last thing is vendor risk management, right? So I create my list of vendors that I am working with within ServiceNow, and we constantly update that that vendor with whatever risk rules, and I'll talk about risk rules a bit, with whatever risk rules and evidence we have around that vendor, so you can make a decision like, you know, we've been working with company A, but they've had some serious breaches or credential leakages, or they're talking about they're being talked about on the dark web, or maybe they have, you know, bad infrastructure built into their company environment. Maybe I'll go with company B instead because they seem to have less risk associated to them, right? Or from a security response team or a security operations team, you know, what vendors should I be aware of, and what, you know, what tooling, what product services should I be most concerned about? Aaron, have any questions come in? I know I'm talking at my usual 60 miles.
No, this has been really smooth. I don't see anywhere to comment. I think one question was, will we have these slides up and available after the webinar today? And the answer is yes. Both the recording, which will be also available in YouTube, and the presenter deck will be uploaded to the listing on our community. So you will see those. And then I think you know, just to add a comment, like, you know, what Chris talks about, how much you're able to impact your prioritization with Recorded Future. It's not just about the, you know, refining like the severity of those vulnerabilities, but really, you know, changing the way that you look at severity, because you can really reduce the number of high criticals when you look at it with a dynamic threat. And I think we're going to cover that in this example slide right here.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So here's you know, the one of the guys I work with that works with ServiceNow is a big fan of stories. So he said, make sure we include a story in this presentation. So, can't tell you what the company is because they didn't want to be named, but they're in the financial technology services. They're a Fortune 500 company, and they implemented ServiceNow vulnerability risk integration with our vulnerability data. And you know, the quote is pretty good, right? It dramatically improve. So the quote exactly was, Recorded Future is the preferred threat vulnerability intelligence provider. And within their security operations team, like they saw huge results, right? 76% reduced number of critical items, right? Again, like they had like 400,000 critical items, right? So this ability to kind of reduce that number was so valuable. You know, they got down to the whole 30 days to patch, which is, you know, when we first talked to them, they didn't think that was ever going to be possible for their environment. But, you know, because they were able to prioritize the things that they really cared about, they were able to get there. And they said that it's like 15 hours saved by replacing manual monthly reporting with a dashboard. So we know that man hours are the true valuable thing within a security operations team, right? So any minute we can save you, but certainly talking in hours is super valuable.
Yeah, and if you look at that in terms of risk quantification, and you've reduced that number of critical items by that percentage, then you can do so much more to reduce, like if you look at quantification of risk, can I reduce 50% of my risk by patching, like that small number of systems? And so they look at risk from that lens, and they're able to really, get to the important stuff first. All the other stuff is going to get, obviously we're going to get to it eventually, but they're able to really reduce the most risk, getting the most bang for their buck out of this prioritization scheme.
Yep. Yeah. So I'll jump into a demo. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
Oh, no, let's hit the demo. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So let me get out of the slide deck here. So like I said, there's 3 different integrations. You can see in my demo system, I kind of have them all stacked here. First integration I want to go over is SIR, right? So SIR, all about, let's manage our incidents. Let's make a decision of what's going on. And so there are 2 kind of different incidents I want to show you. There's an incident created either by a SIM or an EDR or whatever security tooling that you're feeding into SIR. And then there's an RF alert. So if I look at this one, for example, so communication with a TrickBot C2 server, well, what's going on here? Well, an alert came in. There was 4.45 megabytes transferred from this IP on this port to this IP, which is suspected TrickBot on port 443. And you can see all of the work that SIR has done to make sure that this incident is enriched and ready to go. And if you go all the way down to the bottom, you can start to see the evidence here, right? And so there's a few different things. We actually found from the data coming into ServiceNow, we found a hash, we found an indicator, we found we found 2 IP addresses. And if we dive into that indicator, that external indicator, the 36.91 IP, we can see all of the evidence that Recorded Future provides, right? And so, we have some related entities. So we've associated this to banking Trojans, to Trojan, to TrickBot. We don't have any related entities, but we have some risk evidence, right? So this IP address as per Recorded Future. So what these are what we call risk rules, and risk rules are how Recorded Future quantifies risk for different indicator types. So each indicator type, whether that be an IP, a hash, a domain, a URL, a company, a country, whatever thing that we're trying to quantify risk on, we have these set of risk rules, and they are basically the kind of categorizations of risk, and they have different criticalities, different impacts on that risk score I was talking about. So our risk score is from 0 to 99, 99 being extremely malicious. And so the fact that Recorded Future knows this to be an actively communicating C2 server is very malicious. That would immediately push the risk score to 95. It's also a current C2 server, which means that we have network traffic analysis that we're analyzing, and we still see that IP address is acting like a C2 server. Also has a few historical information. So this is a key differentiator for Recorded Future. Not only are we providing the context of what happened now, but we provide the context of what happened in the past. And this changes how an IP address or a hash or a domain may be scored, right? An IP address could be being used by a threat actor for however long, but once the threat actor realizes that most people understand that this is a malicious indicator and it's not working as much anymore because firewalls or EDR products or whatever are blocking it, they're going to release that IP address, and that IP address may become a benign IP address at some point. You do want to have some of the historical context of that IP address, but it's super valuable but it's important that eventually the risk score comes down so you don't get false positives. And this is why generally the false positive rate for Recorded Future is extremely low compared to other threat intelligence sources, is because we understand that and we age our indicators over time every second of every day. And so in this case, we have a few historical things. It was linked to an intrusion method. It's historically a threat research. So we have some threat research associated to the IP address, and it was historically reported as defang, right? And so we also have things like sightings and links and tons of other types of information that as an analyst, you can go in there and read and figure out as much as you want so that you can make a decision, right? Like you could come in here and say, Well, it's an actively communicating C2 server. I know this is real. I'm going to go do something about it right away. But if you're a level 2 or level 3 guy that wants to do a little bit more research, you can. And of course, at any time, you can come in here and go look at this on Recorded Future, right? And so this brings you into Recorded Future's portal, and you get all of the information. So interestingly enough, that was an incident from 2021, and you can see that the IP address has aged out, just like I mentioned. You can see here, we've just recently released our AI insights. So we have a generative AI built on top of our data, only our data. And so you can get some information, but you can see that it was historically observed as a source of spam, and it was historically associated to Trojan, Emotet, Banking Trojan, and TrickBot, right? And so you can see that it's historically linked to those things, but we haven't seen evidence since kind of 2021 about that indicator being malicious.
Yeah,
Right?
that's a good point with any threat analyst who's working in, or security analyst in ServiceNow, is they can go and requery, and it will just be additive in the security incidents. You'll see, when this was more of a risk and when it's not, and new incidents that come in, we'll get the immediate temporal score. Am I right, Chris?
Exactly. Yeah. And it gets refreshed for, I think, a week, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to double check that, but it does keep getting refreshed just in case we find some new evidence while that incident is open.
Yeah, so you can disposition those security incidents as they come in, and then that makes sure they're assigned accordingly, prioritized accordingly, et cetera. So the composite score affects like what you see there in that risk score column, like
Yes, exactly.
how severe is the security incident and what should you work on first.
Exactly. Yeah. And as you can see, this is my demo system. So I have stuff back to 2021, 2019, etc. So the other thing I wanted to show you was what it looks like when you have recorded future alerts. So here I have a recorded future alert within ServiceNow, and what it is typo squat phishing detection, right? So in fact, what it is like in my demo system, I have salesforce.com as a domain of my company. And so what Recorded Future is doing is finding typo squat domain type alerts, right? So like they're finding people trying to typo squat your domain, likely for phishing. And it will show you like, hey, like, do you own salesforce.com? No, well, that's pretty unusual. They're probably trying to phish your customers with that email. And then Recorded Future can help you do the takedown request for that domain if that's something you want to do, right? And so this is a super important, this is just one of the use cases in our brand intelligence module. There are a lot of other use cases that can generate alerts, but it just goes to show that if you don't have to interact with alerts within Recorded Future, you don't want to, you can interact with them within ServiceNow Incident Response. So another thing I wanted to show you was our vulnerability module, right? And so I talked about the risk calculators. So the important thing here is that you can make a decision on how important you believe the recorded future risk score is, right? And so if you go and look at risk calculators, there's lots of them. And I think, there's likely you have even more than what I have in my demo system, right? You can take into account CVSS scoring, whether that be version 2 or 3, whether something's in CISA, all of, how important that asset is to you. Is it a crown jewel asset? Is it, is it a contractor's asset, right? All of these different things that you can allow, to affect the risk scoring of a vulnerability, recorded future being one of them. And I think that's the power that ServiceNow brings you, right? Because we have other integrations into vulnerability platforms, but generally it just sort of shows our score, and you can certainly index based on our score, but that's sort of it. You can't merge, you can't, use your own business rules and your own business risk and your own point of view to risk to make a decision of how all of these things should come together, right? And that's an incredibly valuable part of ServiceNow. So what does that look like? Well, here I have a bunch of vulnerabilities. And you can see I have them listed by risk score. I think I have far too many vulnerabilities. I have like 13,000 pages of vulnerabilities in my demo system. I don't patch a lot, I just demo. But let's look at one of those vulnerabilities in specific. So here's a vulnerability. It's vulnerability 4404. We can see here that, it has a CVE and it has all of the information that ServiceNow vulnerability response does, like remediation steps and initial detection and all of this kind of information. In this case, it's a generate CRFM request within Mozilla Firefox before it's Firefox 23, apparently. Recorded future will present some information to you, right? And so the first thing we'll do is give you a score. So in this case, the score, and again, you have the ability to go look up this vulnerability within recorded future if you want to look at it, the UI. We'll give you the threat score, and again, this is going to be that's going to impact that risk score calculator. But the key thing here is we provide a ton of evidence, right? This vulnerability is historically exploited in the wild by recently active malware. It's, NIST has a very high severity for it. It's been linked to historical cyber exploits. It's been linked to penetration testing tools, right? And so you can make a decision, like the fact that this vulnerability is being has been historically exploited in the wild is a good sign that, maybe I should patch this one, right? And so again, using our data as a data point to make a decision on how to prioritize your vulnerabilities can drastically impact the quality of that prioritization. And again,
I've got a quick question.
Sure.
While we're here, does recorded future provide a risk quantification feature as well? Do you need any clarification on that?
Yeah. So what do you mean exactly by risk quantification? So our risk quantification comes down to the CVE itself. We're very outside in threat intelligence company. Like we don't have an awareness of like what that asset is to you, how accessible that asset is, this is where like the combination of us plus like a breach and attack simulation becomes interesting. I don't know if I answered your question there.
Yeah, maybe you can describe like if there's a ranking by the vulnerability instead of it being like a roll up, and maybe that would help clarify. So if they take the most important or the most critical score, right, when you take that into account for the prioritization.
Yeah, so I mean that comes back to those risk calculators, right? And so coming in here and making a determination of how this impacts. So like we've sort of cheated it here where we set the risk score based on the risk score of recorded futures simply for our demo system. But the idea here is that like if the risk score was above a certain point, you could add to the risk score and do all of this kind of things, right? So you have the capability to adjust that risk score within ServiceNow to make a decision on what things are higher priority. My demo system like has no understanding of the CMDB. My demo system has no understanding of whatever other factors that you take into account when you're prioritizing. All I really have is recorded future. So that's what I'm using to do my prioritization. But this is the power of ServiceNow is being able to take all of those things into account at the same time.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't average those scores. I believe it takes the most critical score as the factor if you're factoring it in with, say, business criticality and some other internet facing yes or no, like bools and things like that. So you can build that out, but I believe it pulls the most critical score because obviously that's the one you want to know about.
Yeah, and I think it's relatively customizable, right? Like you can make a decision of how impactful this is. I've seen a customer that like just takes our score flat because they're doing their score on 100 as well, but they give our score a higher percentage of the score. We get 0.6%, 60% of the prioritization score is our score, and then they just add the different scores together.
Got a couple more questions coming in.
Sure.
So while we answer these questions, I want to take advantage of the time right now. Oops, is there no poll in here? Let me create this poll really quick. So we'd like to give people the opportunity to, get a follow-up afterwards. So I'll launch this. If you could please indicate whether or not you'd like to be contacted. Maybe you're interested in like getting a demo of the app or figuring out if you can install it or get some help. Please indicate that, and we'll follow up with you. So one of the questions was, in addition to risk scoring, can we translate to business value as a risk quantification? And I think this would be more, once you've had the VR, the vulnerable items scored in ServiceNow, that can translate over to if you have this linked to our risk, our IRM risk product, and saying, like we have, because like from the vulnerability analyst perspective, I'm sure it's making sure that the service is not vulnerable, making sure that we're not subject to an intrusion because this is like a critical system that has like PI or is part of our part of our finance accounting or something along those lines. Whereas, you know, calculating the business value is more of a function of our risk modules in ServiceNow. And I think that would be the internal tie-in between the vulnerability and, you know, things that you have set up in GRC. I don't know, Chris, you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the power of ServiceNow, right? That's the kind of context that we'll never have, right? But ServiceNow is kind of like the center of all that information, and the power of ServiceNow is those interconnections.
Yeah. Now, another question, do the rules roll up to a vulnerability type? So you could create a trend or something along those lines.
So in terms of trends, like again, because of the way we pull in data, so what I'll show you, I'll actually bring up my recorded future instance here, and we'll show you a little bit of some of the trends that we do for vulnerability. So the idea here is that we don't look at vulnerability by type in terms of like, you know, what type of tools that they impact and so on and so forth. We have an understanding of what type of tool it's associated to through CPE IDs and things like that. But what we're doing is looking very much at vulnerabilities as a vulnerability and looking at the trend in terms of mentions of it, examples of it being exploited, all of that kind of things. So we do trend analysis on stuff like that. And you can see some examples of this here, right? And so this is for the watch list. Let me do the global one. So this is a global look at vulnerabilities in terms of like new vulnerabilities associated to malware, new vulnerabilities, you know, exploit, like being talked about, right, in the dark web, being linked to pen test tools, right? So you can start to become aware of the kind of improving vulnerabilities, or not improving, the vulnerabilities that are becoming more and more risky. And we also look at it again from a product perspective, but again, this is more looking at it in terms of a product as a target, less of like, hey, it seems like this product is getting more vulnerabilities. Like we don't do that sort of kind of analysis.
Probably something you could do with this information from Recorded Future is create those custom reports in ServiceNow. So Recorded Future has grouped these into categories, and you can take a set of CVEs, like your most, you know, your critical most 50 CVEs related to new exploits, and you can create a report. Or if it's something really specific, like, you know, one of those, you know, makes the headlines type of vulnerabilities that everybody talks about when they come around, you can create reports on the fly for those, and you can get your risk instantaneously. You know, you've already calculated it with the Recorded Future integration, and then you can report on that grouping of vulnerabilities and get that asset disposition from your, you know, from your environment using ServiceNow. So that's the sort of the power of these two tools working together.
Yeah, exactly. I like, honestly, you probably do that way better in ServiceNow than you can do it even from our platform. So that's a great point. Yeah. I mean,
but again, like, you've got the data right in front of you here from the external view. You've got your internal view. It's the best of both worlds, you know.
Exactly. We do have the ability to create advanced queries, right, with our threat intelligence module. So you can come in here and get very, very specific in terms of, hey, when was this vulnerability co-mentioned alongside, you know, these type of industries or these type of threat actors and so on and so forth, and this type of, you know, product, right? You can get very, very, very specific and start to build sort of like, you know, you think like more analyst reports about what's going on. So we certainly have the capability to do that. But that's not necessarily integrated, like that advanced query builder isn't integrated into ServiceNow at the moment.
Cool. I got a question around the enrichment. I think it's more of an enrichment question. Is does Recorded Future make recommendations or mitigating controls so that, you know, an analyst can make an informed decision on the vulnerabilities that are listed as critical? So they get a Recorded Future vulnerability. What kind of information do they get that helps them decide how to remediate?
How to remediate. We do not have a ton on that right now. For a long time, for the history of our company, we've been very much, hey, here's information, do with it what you will. But we are working towards having that type of information in terms of like, you know, opening a vulnerability, because you can see with our new, and again, this is brand new, this was launched on Tuesday. But if you like open one of these vulnerabilities or any other indicator type within Recorded Future, you see this Recorded Future AI Insights. And again, this AI Insights is a generative kind of AI built on top of our data. And so one of the things that we're going to start feeding that generative AI is information about remediation, right? And so eventually, that is the idea, would be that you could open up a vulnerability from Recorded Future. We'll tell you how risky it is and why, but we'll also tell you exactly what you should do about it in terms of patching to this version or putting this type of control in place. Like that is the goal at some point.
Yeah, and that'd be additive to the information that you get on solutions from the, you know, like say the vulnerability scanner or even from the NVD.
Correct. Yeah. again, because while we pull in NVD, obviously, but we're independent, so we try to pull data from wherever we can and make it available.
You want to comment at all on the INSIC group information that comes in with these while we're here?
Yeah,
Then
absolutely.
move on to
So
the rest of the demo.
it's a good point. So obviously, we create a bunch of data that is both human readable in terms of, hey, this is exploited in the wild by recently active malware. We've seen activity 28 out of the last 28 days, 486 all-time sightings, and the last thing we've observed was yesterday. And here's a hash about it, right? That's pretty human readable. But the fact that this thing is exploited in the wild by recently active malware is very machine readable too, right? And this is what makes it very powerful within ServiceNow, is you can start to build workflows or graphs or whatever you need to make based on these risk rules, right? We also create a bunch of human readable intelligence via our INSICT group. So our INSICT group is a team of over 80 researchers that spend all day, every day researching different areas of cybersecurity and geopolitical security. So they are looking at vulnerabilities, at threat actors, at malware families, at companies being targeted, at countries and what's going on in conflicts. And you can see the vast amount of information. Obviously, this is one of the most popular vulnerabilities to have ever existed, but you can see that we have like 23 different notes between tool profiles, validated intelligence event. A validated intelligence event is when we see an attacker using a technique or procedure against a victim, and we kind of state what that happened. But we also have things like snort rules and other threat hunt packages. So if you're someone that uses Sigma rules within your SIM or uses Yara rules within your EDR, we generate those as well every day for new types of threats, whether that be threat actors or malware families or vulnerabilities in this case. Cool. Any other questions there?
No, nothing right now in the queue.
Okay.
To the demo.
Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to show you was some of our third-party risk information, right? Again, I know this presentation was very much focused on the security operations tools of ServiceNow in that kind of bubble of ServiceNow. But at Recorded Future, we think your third-party risk is as important to the cybersecurity team, or at least it should be as important. And so if you have ServiceNow vendor risk management, eventually you get these lists of vendors that you work with, and we can implement the same scoring that we do for vulnerabilities for your vendors. And so in this case, I have it ranked kind of top to bottom, and let's pick on Microsoft because it's easy to pick on Microsoft. And you can see we have all kinds of information. So we have a recently validated cyber attack. We have company website using unsupported technology versions, company website with a high risk vulnerability, domains with overly permissive SPF. I'm sure there's probably infections recently reported. As you can imagine, Microsoft is one of the biggest companies in the world, so therefore gets attacked and has a bunch of problems all the time in the world. But this is a tremendous amount of information for a cyber team to understand what's going on in the vendors that they work with, right? And so while Microsoft would be an example of a pretty noisy one, you could be surprised at the information we can find about even smaller vendors in terms of like, hey, like they have a very high amount of leaked credentials, or hey, like this this small cloud or infrastructure provider is hosting a lot of malicious infrastructure. Why is that, right? And so that type of information can help you from a procurement perspective, kind of make a decision, is this a vendor I want to work with? Or B, from a cyber risk posture management, right? Should I be concerned with this vendor? Should I put extra controls in place while working with this vendor? That type of information. So again, another data source that we can provide within ServiceNow, and another data source we think another intelligence source we think is very valuable to the cyber world. And that's sort of everything I wanted to show. Were there any other questions before I jump back to the last slide?
I don't see anything yet.
No. All right, so last slide, and again, this is more of a call to action, or what do you want to do if you want to learn more? I provided a link to the Recorded Future demo page, so click there. No pressure. We can provide you a demo and answer any questions you have. So this is both the ability to see a demo of our core platform and all of the modules. Again, our modules are listed here if you wanted to see. I definitely talked more about the ones that we work with within ServiceNow, but obviously we have a few other modules that may be interesting to you. So this recorded feature demo link is gives you the ability to kind of get a demo of all of those modules and even our integrations. I provided links to our apps within the ServiceNow App Store. Feel free to go look at screenshots, read the documentation, some really interesting stuff there. We have a CVE monthly page. Like if you're part of a vulnerability team and you want to be aware of kind of what's going on in the vulnerability world, feel free to go to that page. And here's an example of our March 2023 report to click on. Obviously, you can find me on LinkedIn if you have any questions. I'm happy happy to have new connections and love to chat with you. I hope you enjoyed this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, definitely. So any you have a distro email or anything that we should provide, or just say like contact?
Here, I'll actually, you know what? We'll keep it simple. I'll throw my email on here, and so you'll have my email right away. You can just reach out to me. Happy to answer any questions or get you pointed at the right person.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris. We will be just so you know, if you are traveling to RSA next week, this is 2023. For those of you watching this in the future, we'd love to see you in person. There is an event, a joint event that we're putting on together at RSA as well on Tuesday night. So a chance to just follow up, ask questions in a casual context. And hopefully everybody enjoyed this. And I want to thank Chris again for coming on and presenting. And this recording will be available for anyone who wants to, if you'd be willing to share it, we'd encourage you to do that. Rewatch, learn more. Always happy to do that stuff. So thank you all for the extra attention today. We'll give you 13 minutes back in your hour. Have a great rest of the week.